this is Eva Anson welcoming you to this Bite-Sized Bio webinar, which today is sponsored by Eppendorf. Today's presentation is titled Essentials in Centrifugation, Better Safe Than Sorry, and is being presented by Sugish Pillai and Dr. Kersten Iserman from Eppendorf. Sugish graduated in India in 2012 as a mechanical engineer specializing in material science. After gaining sales experience in advanced materials, he received a Master of Engineering in Technical Management in Germany. He worked as a microscopy application specialist at Olympus, specifically focusing on particle contamination analysis in cleanroom laboratories, before joining Eppendorf as a product marketing manager for centrifugation in 2021. Kersten studied biology in Hamburg and earned her doctorate in molecular biology at the Bernhard Nocht Institute for Tropical Medicine. She then worked for 5 years as a postdoc in academic research and education before joining Eppendorf in 2011. She is now an application specialist for the Eppendorf Separation Division. As always, we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. So please type any questions you have into the questions box, which appears on the bottom of your screen, and I'll put them to Sugish and Kersten at the end. So now over to you, Sugish, for the presentation.
Thank you, Eva. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from my side. So today our topic is essentials in centrifugation, and let me guide you the first one with the agenda. So today we will focus on 4 different topics. So I will start with the introduction of centrifugation, some basics and principle, and then followed by tips and tricks in centrifugation with my colleague Kirsten. And also we will focus on things good to know before we spin the samples for the next time. And at the end, we will have a poll followed by a Q&A session. So let's begin with the principle of centrifugation. So as you know, centrifugation is everywhere, and you can see this around us, like the images illustrated here. Let it be the washing machine, a roller coaster, or the other devices that you see in the slide. I think all of us can agree that centrifugation is everywhere. And also, more importantly, the principle of centrifugation is everywhere. So let's say that now coming to the lab, centrifugation is part of almost in every workflow in the lab. So no matter which specific protocol that you use, every centrifuge works according to the same principle, isn't it? So let's go further into the principles of centrifugation. So what happens normally, we have the circular rotor, and the rotor has a rotational moment. So this rotational moment of the rotor generates a relative centrifugal force, which is basically a multiples of Earth's gravitational force. So this relative centrifugal force allows the separation of particles or the substances in your sample. This could be based on the density, size, shape, and viscosity of the medium. And this is on a high level how the centrifugal force is also acting and how the relative centrifugal force is coming into play when it comes to the basics of centrifugation. So moving on about the relative centrifugal force itself, because at first to start with, so relative centrifugal force, if you encounter in the lab, the term in your protocols RCF, it stands for relative centrifugal force. It is basically measured in the units of gravity, or xg, which is the multiples of g force. Normally in the lab, you might have encountered in your past an interesting question that is always coming in. How are the rotational speed and the relative centrifugal force is related? Because if you see different protocols, it might be RCF or RPM. So how are these really related? But the answer, if you ask, it is very simple. It depends on the rotation speed in RPM and the maximum rotor radius. So as the rotor is circular, and the RPM and RCF can be converted by using the following formula, as you see in the slide. So it's basically the centrifugal force, or the RCF, is the product of the rotor radius in centimeters normally, and the square rotational speed in RPM. So this is multiplied with 1.118 times 10 to the power of minus 5. So this relation and the distinction between the RPM and RCF is important for every application, as two different rotors, for example, running at a different rotor radii, but at the same rotational speed in RPM, will apply different acceleration to the sample. And this can lead to a different result. And this is one of the points which we will also cover during the best practice session today. And we will discuss this topic, how to manage the sample and how to distinguish between RCF and RPM. And speaking of the RCF, so now let's move on to the topic of the centrifuges itself. So as you see in the slide, there are universally different types of centrifuges and models available. So from the left to right, you see the small centrifuge, which is the Minispin, which is a microcentrifuge. And we can go up to, for example, a super versatile benchtop centrifuge in the center, or the general purpose centrifuge, and to the extreme right, where we can go up to high speed and ultra centrifuges. So there are different options available. This is basically because the demands coming from the different workflow, and these demands could go up to just from a small 12 place samples to spin it, or it can go up to do a really high end processing, which could be up to 4 times 1.5 liter samples, or even 6 times 1 liter samples. And this is one reason, and this is an example how varied the applications can range from a small microcentrifuge to an ultracentrifuge, where the speeds will go up to 1 million G-force. And you heard it right, it is 1 million G-force. So this is some of the first basics of centrifugation about the RCF and RPM, and also the different types of centrifuges available universally. So now let's move to the next chapter, which is the tips and tricks in centrifugation. For this, we have pre-recorded a video for you to show a live example about the tips and tricks with an interaction.
We'd like to provide some tips and tricks in centrifugation. For this, I would like to invite my colleague, Kirsten.
Hi, Zowish.
Hi, Kirsten.
Nice to be with you here today.
Pleasure is mine. Kirsten, I want to ask some general questions and to share some tips and tricks from your experience. So for most of us, centrifugation sounds very easy. But do you have any tips from your side before I go to my sample?
Yes, centrifugation. I know centrifugation always sounds easy, but centrifugation is more than just taking your samples, put it in any centrifuge and just press start. You have to know your application, and you have to know the requirements for your specific application regarding speed, regarding volume, vessel type, and of course temperature, as well as the rotor type, which suits your application best. So there are quite a few things that you can consider to improve your separation results.
Yeah, and well said. It's applications, right? There are several applications in the world.
Yes, it's important to consider the requirements for your specific application. And let's just have a look, a more detailed look at some popular applications. Of course, there's no such thing as the one and only G-force or perfect G-force for an application that is required for separation. I mean, for example, in biochemistry, cell biology, or microbiology applications, the required speed can vary between specific sample types, or between different protocols or different work steps. So, but I think we can generalize by saying, when considering the required centrifugal forces for separation, by saying, well, plant and animal cells need less centrifugal force than, for example, clinical samples or bacteria, and the required speed increases for biological samples like DNA or RNA, up to viruses and cell organelles, where forces of several hundred of thousands G are required.
Wow.
And now let's have a look at the centrifuge types that meet the requirements. The maximum relative G forces that can be achieved by the different centrifuge types increase from small general purpose benchtop centrifuges, or so-called clinical centrifuges, over micro and multi-purpose benchtop centrifuges, over high-speed floor-standing centrifuges, up to ultracentrifuges, which can reach centrifugal forces up to 1 million G.
Yeah, ultracentrifuges and 1 million. Yeah. So when we talk of the different centrifuges, we definitely have to talk about the rotors, the fixed angle and the swing bucket rotor.
Yes, Sugish, this is a very important topic, I think. There are two main types of rotors, the fixed angle rotors and the swing bucket rotors. And each of them, of course, has their advantages and disadvantages. Let's talk about fixed angle rotors first. They have a fixed angle, like the name already says, mostly between 30 and 45 degrees. Due to the rigid design, they can withstand high gravitational forces, and thus lower centrifugation times can be realized. On the other hand, the defined number of boreholes and the shape of the boreholes, of course, limits the vessel flexibility. These rotors are the best choice for pelleting applications where high gravitational forces are needed and are applied to the sample. On the other hand, the swing bucket rotors, the buckets of these rotors swing out at a 90-degree angle, and the pellet is located directly at the bottom of the tube. These swing bucket rotors usually can withstand lower G forces than the fixed angle rotors due to the different adapter options available for them, but they allow a high vessel flexibility and a high vessel capacity. These rotors are always first choice when doing phase separation or gradient centrifugation applications, as it allows to separate the phases without disturbance of tube walls, and you have, and of course, you have a long separation distance.
Okay, so this is interesting to know the difference. So as a summary, with the fixed angle rotors, it is good for pelleting applications because of the fixed angle.
Yes.
And for swing bucket, it is good for density gradient and also the phase separation.
Yes, first choice for phase separation and gradient centrifugation, and the fixed angle rotors, due to the high gravitational forces that can be applied, are the first choice, of course, for pelleting applications.
Okay, so this is super clear. So now let me also talk a little bit about the vessels, because I think next to rotors, we already have the vessels, and I'm wondering, there are different types of vessels here, like the bottles, conicals, and in different shapes. So what is your tips and tricks for us?
Yeah, there's almost an endless number of different tube, bottle, and plate formats, which can be centrifuged and which are needed to be put in a centrifuge, of course. In order to allow the greatest possible flexibility and reduce the sheer amount of adapters that would be needed to centrifuge all these different vessel types, Eppendorf invented the so-called universal adapter. And in these adapters, you can centrifuge different vessel types with only one adapter.
Wow, one adapter with all these different consumables and the vessels.
Let me show you.
Amazing.
So, as you can see here with the universal adapter 1, you can spin 15 ml tubes, and as well as 5 ml tubes. And if the colleague wants to spin deep well plates, this is possible as well. We have the universal adapter 2 here, which can spin 50 ml tubes, as well as PCR plates or microplates. So one adapter for plates and conicals. This is my favorite adapter. It's the universal adapter 3, which is able to spin 50 ml tubes, as well as microplates or PCR plates. And when you take this insert out, you can even spin bottles up to 250 ml. When talking about the different adapters, I have to mention one very, very important topic, and that is, when choosing the adapter, make sure that you are choosing the adapter that really fits and supports your vessel. For example, if you want to spin 25 ml tubes in a 50 ml conical insert or adapter, you need to support, of course, the bottom of your tube. If you put it in the insert for a 50 ml conical, the lid can be torn off during centrifugation because high forces are applied. Another example, if you are centrifuging bottles with a flat bottom, of course this is only possible in adapters or buckets with a flat bottom. On the other hand, when centrifuging bottles with a conical bottom, you need to use the fitting adapter with a conical bottom. Otherwise, you will lose your samples as the bottle will crash during centrifugation. One thing that happens from time to time is when you use conical tubes. There are conical tubes that have a conical bottom, of course, and there are conical tubes that have a conical bottom insert, but they are skirted and they can stand. So you cannot use these skirted conicals in a conical adapter, of course, as the skirt will crash during centrifugation, and in worst case it will crash the whole conical and you will lose your precious sample.
You mentioned this is your favorite adapter, and it's mine now, because I really like the design and also how we can interchange the two different inserts. It makes life in a lab very easy on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, and it reduces the amount of adapters needed tremendously.
Great. That was a nice tip and tricks, Kirsten. Thanks for that. So let's move on to the next section. So in this section, I want to ask some things that is good to know, because I think you can share your expertise because you are coming directly from the lab as well.
Yes, sure. Being in the lab myself and from former PhD days, I hope I can share some best practices that are of help.
Okay, so let me start with the first and the most challenging question, because we received this many times about phase separations. So what is your best practice, and what are some things that you can share about phase separation in gradient applications?
There are a lot of things that you can, that you have to take care of course. Let's have an example and look at phase separation with fixed angled or swing bucket rotors. So there are several very common applications which rely on phase separation. For example, the isolation of mononuclear cells from blood via fecal gradient, or the isolation of DNA or RNA via phenol chloroform isolation. And of course, there are different practices. It is common practice to use swing bucket rotors for fecal isolation of mononuclear cells. The longer path length enables the formation of defined phases in a horizontal position that remains when tubes are transferred to an upright position. So remixing of phases is avoided, and to reduce vibration to a minimum, as we can see in the next transition, the centrifuge brake is usually set to 0. So if your phase transition is not satisfactory, I would always recommend to check, is the brake really deactivated? On the other hand, deactivation of the brake, of course, the protocol can take forever. It's a very time-consuming step of that protocol. And we have a nice application note where we showed in modern low vibration centrifuges, you can increase the brake and set it from 0 to 1 up to 3 and save up to 30 minutes when the deceleration ramp is carefully increased without compromising the results. It's always to find the best ratio between phase separation and time. So you have possible solutions when that phase transition is not clearly delineated. Check the brake, deactivate the brake. If the protocol takes much too long, you can carefully adjust the deceleration ramp, especially with the newer centrifuges, of course. However, there are other common phase separation protocols that can be done in fixed angle rotors. As we see on the next slide, for example, the isolation of DNA or RNA via trizone, relying on a phenol chloroform gradient. It may happen that the phase separation is not satisfactory and that you see a cloudy interface and that problems occur with turbid interfaces and so on. And there you can consider to maybe use a swing bucket rotor. There are swing bucket rotors even for smaller sample sizes. So turbid interfaces, not a very clear phase separation. A possible solution would be to check the brake, of course, and to check the rotor suitability. Maybe you're better off in your protocol with a swing bucket rotor.
Okay, so this is where swing bucket rotor definitely helps. So let's come to the next one for the protocol transfer. And but before going there, we have a nice video to show the protocol transfer.
So, Christian, are there any best practices when it comes to protocol transfer? For example, let's imagine there are different centrifuges in the lab, like this one, and how can one do an experiment in different centrifuge and transfer the experiment protocol to different devices?
Yeah, that's a nice question. And this is very important. And due to my experience, well, it's not always going smoothly in a lab. Are you ready for a competition?
I'm always.
Okay. Just for our audience to remember, you can calculate the relative centrifugal force that is applied to your samples when you have the rotor radius, of course, and you have the revolutions per minute. So using this formula, we can compare the relative centrifugal force that is applied to the samples with different centrifuges. So let's do an experiment. You're using the Minispin and I'm using the 5430R centrifuge. Let's assume that we run our protocol at 14,000 RPM. Well, I'm putting my samples in a rotor, which has a radius of 9.5 centimeters.
And in my Minispin, the rotor is 6 centimeters.
And now we are using this formula that you explained earlier. We are calculating the relative centrifugal force, and we will put the revolutions per minute here, and then we will insert the value for the rotor radius into that formula. And now, Sugish, my samples spin with 20,800 G.
And guess what? My Minispin is spinning at 13,150 G.
So do you think that we will have the same results?
No, definitely not. And that is exactly why the RCF is very important. And also we can see the diameter here, the difference of 6 centimeter and the 9.5 centimeter. So always let's focus on the RCF, or relative centrifugal force.
Yeah, if you transfer your protocols between different centrifuges, it really makes sense to have your protocol in RCF rather than in RPM. This is important, that you can really compare the results and have always, the same pelleting or separation efficiency.
Great.
Due to my experience, unfortunately, this is still not common in every lab. But as a tip, well, always be sure that you have the RCF in your protocols. And this makes life easier, and this makes protocol transfer much easier between different centrifuges.
Definitely. And this is only the microcentrifuges that we're talking, but the same is also applied also in the multipurpose centrifuges as well.
Yes, of course.
Okay, coming back from the protocol transfer and the relevance of RCF, my next question is, I think it's common for most of the lab, about the best practice about the correct rotor loading. Please.
Well, there's only one best practice, always balance, of course. I mean, almost all centrifuges have an automated imbalance detection or imbalance shutoff. And I know from former times that people sometimes tend to, well, I would try if it's okay, and if the centrifuge will imbalance shut off, then I will rebalance. But well-balanced samples still prevent damage to rotor and instrument. You always have to keep that in mind, and it prolongs the lifetime of your equipment. You always have to keep in mind that each imbalance puts stress onto the motor shaft and rotor pivots. I mean, you can say, well, my sample, the difference in sample is just 0.5 grams. Mm-hmm. Well, you wouldn't feel that if you hold your tubes. Well, 0.5 grams, it's nothing. Mm-hmm. But if you spin your samples at 20,000 G, guess what? It's the difference of 10 kilos. Mm. And then you put your samples in an ultracentrifuge and you spin with 500,000 G. Imagine 0.5 gram difference will be the equivalent of 250 kilograms. Mm. And of course that can cause damage to the rotor shaft. When you load a swing bucket rotor, as you can see on the pictures in the slideshow, it is important to occupy all rotor positions. Otherwise, the rotor arms will bend. The buckets should be of equal weight always when you are loaded. If the rotor is not loaded completely, always position the vessels within the buckets in a pattern that the rotor pivots are evenly stressed. And of course, make sure that the tubes that you are using have been specified for your rotor. Okay. If you have a look at the pictures with the swing bucket rotor with plates, it doesn't make sense to load just the upper part of the plate because the rotor won't swing out smoothly. So this is important as well. In fixed angle rotors, of course, you have to ensure that all tubes are directly opposite of each other and they are loaded symmetrically. Yeah? For each vessel that you insert, a vessel with equal weight has to be added directly opposite of it. Mm. And take care of balancing because this will prolong the lifetime of your equipment.
Exactly, and well said, Kirsten. And coming from the correct rotor loading, I think we can move to the next question. And this is really, really crucial because this question is about what's around us. It is aerosols. And can you tell us a little bit more about aerosols in a lab?
Yeah, it's an important question. I mean, especially since the start of the corona pandemic, the whole world has been talking about aerosols. there hardly exists a place in the world without aerosols. I mean, may they be of natural or anthropogenic origin. As per definition, they are colloidal systems with particles suspended in a gas, which is on our planet usually air, of course. And yeah, it can be dust, it can be pollen, it can be, of course, from the traffic, from industry. But when we are talking about aerosols in the lab, the focus, of course, is on bioaerosols, comprising particles of variable origin. And although the majority of these aerosols in the lab are harmless, there can be hazardous aerosols, of course. Especially when you're working with infectious material, like microorganisms, viruses, parasites, fungal spores, and so on. And as you can see in the next slide, there are worldwide cases of laboratory-acquired infections continue to be reported. And these result from the production and mostly from the inhalation of infectious aerosols. Fortunately, not all of these infections really are symptomatic, because as laboratory-acquired infections, they can be symptomatic or asymptomatic. But still, of course, you want to avoid this. The majority of these laboratory-acquired infections are caused by bacteria, and they occur as well in clinical as in research field.
Oh, okay. This actually sounds scary about the bioaerosols in lab. So, I'm just trying to understand, what are the different sources? From where are these aerosols coming from the lab?
Yeah, let's have a look at the next slide, where you can see a small choice of laboratory activities that can cause aerosols. And most of these activities are done without even thinking about aerosols. I mean, you have a look at your bacterial cultures, your pipetting, mixing, and so on. There are a lot of sources of aerosols in the lab, and of course, one source is or can be centrifugation. And therefore, adequate precautions have to be taken, of course, when you are working with infectious or harmful substances.
Oh, wow. And speaking about aerosols, let us come to the point, like, how does Eppendorf help in supporting the aerosols? But I think for this, we can directly go to our next video.
How does Eppendorf help in preventing aerosols in lab?
Yeah, Eppendorf offers aerosol-tight rotors and aerosol-tight caps for the buckets of the bigger centrifuges, of course. The rotors and the buckets with the caps are certified aerosol-tight after put down. We have these aerosol-tight lids for the fixed angle rotors, and additionally they are quick lock lids, so they can be closed and opened with a quarter of a turn. And for the caps, we have these aerosol-tight caps, and you can close it, transport it with one hand, put it in the centrifuge, and then close it. So it's a one-handed operation for our aerosol-tight caps, and a quick lock lid for the aerosol-tight rotors here. Just one click, you're done, and you're on the safe side, or the rotors are certified according to port and down.
This is interesting because it is not only the aerosols, so now it is also about the ergonomics. So it's very simple to operate.
Yes.
Also with the one-handed operation.
It's very simple to operate, and you have very low forces are required. So, but please always remember, I mean, the rotors are only the second level of protection against aerosols. The first level, of course, will be the tube. So never fill your tube up to the rim, of course, as spilling can occur. Be sure that you fill your tubes only to the maximum volume. So first level of first safety level is always the tube, and then comes the rotor.
It might happen that because we need to do our experiments faster and we are going to fill our samples completely and we are going to spin, and what happens if we spill the samples after the centrifugation?
Yeah, always in a rush. I would recommend to clean the rotor immediately afterwards, because, well, I have a nice example here. This is a rotor that has not been taken care of a lot. So, and heavy corrosion takes place. So, anything special that you recognize here?
Oh, I see something over there. So let's give it a try, and looks like a hole. But can I put this in?
Yes, try to.
Okay. Oh, it's really a hole.
It's really a hole. So this is an example for heavy corrosion. And this rotor, of course, cannot be used safely. You can throw it directly away. And this can occur if you don't take care of your equipment. This heavy corrosion, of course, is, well, this should never take place. There shouldn't be any holes in your rotor. We recommend to have a look at your rotors, well, now and then, and better one time more than one time too less.
Exactly. So, yeah, and I really feel this is extreme.
Yes, this is extreme. But remember, in the labs, the people are often working with, for example, sodium chloride or so, and these salts, of course, can corrode the metal of the rotor.
Okay, now let's come to the saving part. How do we actually clean the rotor? So are there any kind of best tools from the best practice?
Yes, of course. And Sugish, I see some metal cleaning stuff here. Please be honest, you don't need these. Never use any metal scrubs or metal brushes on your rotor, because you will destroy the surface. We recommend to use soft wipes, soft cloth. Of course, you can use these very soft sponges to clean the rotor. And of course, you need to clean the bore holes so that this corrosion is avoided. And we can use these flasks cleaner with plastic scrubs, no metal scrubs, of course, and be sure that the tip of the brushes are not metal. So you can clean the bore holes and use water and mild soap. If you need to disinfect your stuff, you can use ethanol, 70% ethanol. Yeah.
And also looks like we can also use the plastic.
Yes, if you have some heavy crustaceans on the rim, you can use a plastic brush or so and try to lose these. This is possible, but well, when you clean your rotor after the run, I hope it will never come to such heavy corrosion or such heavy crustaceans, so that you're fine with these tools.
Yeah, as a summary, I can only think of one statement. So we have to take care of our centrifuge. Only then the centrifuge will take care of us.
Yes, Sugish, that was a really nice wording. And because maintenance is a very, very important topic, I would like to sum up the things we discussed in the video on the slides. I know it sounds annoying, but I strongly recommend to clean and dry the chamber after each run. On the photo on the left-hand side, you can see a corroded chamber, and this can take place if you don't take care of your condensation, and if you're centrifuging, of course, different stuff with salt and so. So wipe the chamber after each run, especially if condensation occurs. If you're spinning at low temperatures, you can use, as we already mentioned, a lint-free microfiber cloth. And well, when talking about condensation, please leave the centrifuge lid open overnight, so that you avoid all the wetness inside the centrifuge chamber. Of course, it should be a routine to clean the housing as well. The chamber inside, we talked about that, and of course the rotor shaft. When you do that, use water, use mild soap, neutral agents, and a soft cloth, and do that on a regularly basis, because, well, again, I can only say it prolongs the lifetime of your equipment. And on the next slide, you see a summary of rotor maintenance. There's an example of a rotor with heavy frustrations, torque frustrations. As I said, when you observe spilling, always clean the rotor and the lid immediately to avoid these frustrations, these heavy frustrations, which might be cleaned with a brush, with a plastic brush. So you can fill the boreholes with water, of course, but I would not recommend to soak the whole rotor in water, so only fill the boreholes, because the water might remain in the openings. And after you cleaned everything, the rotor can be dried with a soft cloth again. As I said, those stubborn stain can be removed with plastic scrub or test tube brushes, but it would be better to not let it come to those heavy crustaceans. They will corrode, of course, the rotor. Check your rotor and the rotor lid on a regular basis for the need of maintenance. This is what I strongly recommend, and what is often forgotten in the rush of everyday laboratory life.
Exactly.
Say, yeah.
And these are definitely very important information and great information. Thanks for sharing, because I think it's also better to do inspect the rotor and also maintain the centrifuge one time more than one time less.
Yes.
And definitely we have to take care of the centrifuge,
of course,
for the centrifuge to take care of us.
I mean, you expect those devices to run
forever,
often 7 days a week, 12 hours a day or so, and of course you have to take care of your equipment. I mean, you wouldn't expect your car to drive 200,000 kilometers without changing the oil or bring it to an inspection from time to time.
Exactly.
And same is true for centrifuges, where high forces are applied, and yeah.
Exactly. And really, thank you for sharing your best practices. But stating all this, so these were some of the challenges in the lab and some of the best practices which we can provide. But we wanted to hear from you as well, because you are directly in the lab. And what are the common challenges that you face in your day-to-day basis in your lab? It could be about the reproducible results. It could be about contamination of transfer of the samples. It could be about protocols, or even handling between the devices, or more common could be sample spillage or any other. So we would be happy to hear from you. What are your common challenges? Okay, so we see the result, and thank you very much for voting. So we see that almost 33%, it's a mix between not having a reproducible results and also transfer of protocols. We are glad that we covered the protocol transfer between the different centrifuges in the lab, between micros and also multipurpose. But Kristen, for the reproducible results, can you share from your experience?
I mean, there are, of course, a million things that can influence the results. I would say when it comes to centrifugation, of course, use the same temperature, use the same RCF when you are switching between different protocols, so that you are sure that no matter which centrifuge in your lab is free and you can put your samples in, that you always apply the same force, of course. Don't be in a rush, pre-cool your centrifuge if you need 4 degrees. All these things, of course, can influence your results. And yeah, of course, don't be in a rush, but if you wait too long after centrifugation, of course, this might not be too good.
Exactly.
As well.
Exactly, well said. And also we see around 22 to 24% are also split between contamination issues and also sample spillage. And for sample spillage, exactly, we also discussed always to fill up to the maximum limit of the tube. Yes,
you have to consider the maximum filling volume of your vessel, of course, and because, well, I have some vessel here, because if you fill it, always consider that in the rotor you have an angle. So maximum filling volume is important to avoid spillage. Close the vessels, of course, very carefully. Be sure that they are really closed. And when talking about maximum filling volume, of course, you have to take care that you do not that you use the minimum filling volume, because most vessels do have a minimum filling volume as well. Otherwise, they would just crush in the centrifuge. Yeah, so the first level of security when talking about aerosols, when talking about spilling, and so is always the vessel. Yeah, and this is something that you might forget. So if you're in a rush and say, well, I have this much of my sample and I have to fill it in the tube, well, you're always at a risk, of course.
Exactly.
So maximum filling volume, minimum filling volume, and of course, vessels have different can withstand different forces. I mean, a glass vessel, of course, cannot be spun at the same speed or cannot withstand the same force as these polypropylene tubes.
Yeah, and also we see that roughly 24% is also for others. So it would be also nice to know what are your challenges if you also write in the Q&A, so we can also answer this live. So now maybe we will go to the last chapter, which is Q&A session.
Thank you, Sigurd and Kirsten. That was such a great presentation and really interesting with the poll results as well. We have a few questions from the audience. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to post this in the questions box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. So the first question I've got for you is about rotor maintenance. What about very well-kept rotors that are also very old? Do rotors have a limited lifetime?
Well, usually rotors do have a limited lifetime because they have to endure during their lifetime high forces. They have to withstand those high forces. Usually the manufacturers state the lifetime of their rotors in the operating manual. For Eppendorf centrifuges like the 5418 or 5420 the rotors do have an unlimited lifetime. But the bigger the centrifuge, of course, and the higher the forces, and those rotors have a so-called service lifetime. And this means that it cannot be guaranteed that the material can withstand the stress. If the rotors are really well kept, I would recommend to have a professional rotor inspection by a service technician. Eppendorf offers those kind of service. And these service technicians, they can tell you if it's still safe to use your old rotor. That would be the best practice, I would.
Great, thank you. That's really useful to know. And you mentioned using mild reagents to clean the rotors, but we need to disinfect our rotors and want to autoclave them. Is that possible?
Yes, the majority of rotors are autoclavable at 121 degrees for 20 minutes. Please check in the manual, in the rotor manual, to be really sure. The lids, of course, but never autoclave your rotor with the lid on. Please always take the lid off before autoclaving, of course. And the same is true for the buckets and for the adapters. They can be autoclaved as well if this is necessary. I mean, if you need to disinfect, you can always consider to spray it, as we mentioned in the video before, with ethanol, 70% ethanol, spray the rotors, the buckets, the adapters, and then wipe it after a few minutes. That would be a safe decontamination practice as well. So, but yes, rotors are autoclavable. Most rotors are autoclavable. You can find all the information in the operating manual, or well, any manufacturer will be happy to answer your question. If you have a question there, ask your sales rep also.
Thanks. And since we were just talking about buckets and adapters, we have a question that is, what is the difference between buckets and adapters?
Well, you have a bucket where you put, which you can put on the swing bucket rotors, of course, in the bucket, which is really just a bucket. You can use different vessels. So, and for each vessel, you would need a different adapter. It's a difference if I spin a 50 ml conical, or a 5 ml conical. So if you place it in a big bucket, then of course the small tube will turn around. So you have the bucket, and in the bucket you need the special adapter that fits your vessel type.
Great, thanks.
Also covered about the universal rotor.
Yes.
So where we can have, like, if you have different vessels like these, you can also use one adapter for the different consumables.
Adapter is always an insert that you would put in the bucket to spin different vessel types.
Great. Thanks. We've got a question about if there are any disadvantages of centrifugation. For example, cells are exposed to a very high gravitational force, which can alter the cell structure. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, of course, that can happen. And depending on your application, of course, if you want to work with the cells afterwards, I mean, sometimes you just would want to isolate RNA or DNA, then it's of course not such an issue, but it's always, you have to find the best ratio of time, of course, and result. So when you want to work with your cells and you are observing that they are stressed, or the membranes are somehow broken or so, you have to adapt the applied G-force. And and this is always, as I said, it's a ratio between how much time do I want to spend, and how, and what can I endure in loss on sample loss or cell loss. So, and this is something that can be very specific for each application, even for each cell type. Yeah, and this is something of course you will have to find out for your application which is the best G-force that can be applied without the protocol taking forever. Because of course you can wait for the natural gravitational force to to separate yourself from the medium or whatever, but of course that will take forever. And this is something you have to make sure for yourself. What can I, what works for me?
Yeah, we can always adjust between the acceleration, especially between the braking ramps.
Yes.
So as you take forward and maybe 1, 2, 3. So we need to do the right balance.
Yes. And to establish a really good protocol, I mean, yeah, it can take time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I guess for everyone to figure it out for what's best for them. The next question is about forces. Is the RCF the same as G?
Well, the relative centrifugal force that is applied is well, it depends on the revolutions per minute that is put on the on your samples, and the RCF is always a multiple of G. I mean, G, the gravitational force. So if we apply 1 G to the sample, or only 1 G, then you will just put it on the table and wait natural gravitational force to do its work. But when we centrifuge our samples, we put a relative centrifugal force upon the samples that is a multiple of the gravitable Earth force. Yeah.
Thanks. And a follow-up question is, do we have to fill in all the slots in the roto buckets, or is it okay if they're just opposite each other?
They have to be opposite of each other well, and always well balanced, of course. So that the stress that is, I don't know whether it's a fixed angle rotor or a swing bucket rotor, that the stress that is put on the rotor is equally is equally on each side. Yeah. So you don't have to always put to fill all positions, but you have to be sure that you balance equally. Yeah, with the same weight, of course, not only volume, but with the same weight. So don't put water on one side to balance your heavy salt sample on the other side with the same volume. No, it has to be the same weight, of course.
Exactly.
We've got a few questions left. I don't know if you want to go through, there's about 6 left. Do you want to go through all of them, or just address it offline?
We can, we will have a look, I think. Okay. Afterwards, we will answer every question.
Okay. I can skip some and go to.
Yes.
So there is one that I think a lot of people are wondering is centrifuging for a long time at a slow speed equivalent to centrifuging for a short time at a high speed?
Yes, we can say that. You have, of course, try to find out the speed difference. And I mean, there are 2 things. If you're using the same vessel and the same sample volume, the same filling height, you can say it's equivalent. And of course, you can calculate the time that you might need.
So yeah, it's the balance, right, at the end.
Yes. So I don't know if you want to have a special time, so time X, you can try for the first time to multiply the time on the centrifuge that known centrifuge, yeah, and then with a ratio of the RCF values. So divide the RCF of your known centrifuge with the RCF you want to use now, and then you get an estimation of time that you can try for the first time. Then of course you have to adapt to see if the if the results are comparable. But of course, lower forces mean longer centrifugation times, and this is different rotors as well. I mean, swing bucket rotors usually use lower usually reach lower centrifugal forces, so you would need more time to separate your samples than when you use a fixed angle rotor and can apply very high forces.
I've got one question left for you. Anyone who asked the question that we didn't get to, we'll send all the questions to Sugesh and Kirsten, and they can look at them offline and answer you. So the one remaining question is, what are some sources of vibrations? If everything is balanced, why would a large centrifuge still vibrate?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big centrifuge. Of course, it does have a motor, and if you're using the cooling system, it has a compressor, of course. And well, the newest generation of centrifuges are best engineered, and there are really low vibrations. But every material, and we're talking about rotors here, as you use a rotor, and this is of a material. Most rotors are of aluminum, has a so-called eigenfrequency, and this is just physics. They have an eigenfrequency at a special revolutions per minute. It's mostly around 600 to 1000 G, and there you have vibrations. And this is normal, this is physics, and you cannot get rid of that. This is just the material, the character of each material. And it depends also on the form of the rotor, so on the shape of the rotor, this eigenfrequency.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for answering all these questions. And that brings us to the end of our seminar today. If you've enjoyed this seminar and would like to view the video recording, please visit the seminars page on bitesizebio.com. So thank you again, Sugesh and Kirsten, for a very illuminating presentation and a great discussion afterwards. And thank you to our sponsor, Eppendorf. And finally, thanks to you, the audience, for taking the time to attend and listen in. So until next time, good luck in your research, and goodbye from all of us at Eppendorf and Bitesize Bio.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.